Okay, folks, today we're going to be talking about Boys and Girls by Alice Munro. This is a short story that explores the impact of environment on self and the role of the status quo on identity. We're going to look through a series of quotes starting with some fox quotes. The first we're going to take a look at is "My father was a fox farmer, that is, he raised silver foxes in pens. In the fall and early winter, when their fur was prime, he killed them and skinned them and sold their pelts." Now, this is the first sentence or series of sentences in the short story. And what that serves to tell us is, well, what comes first in the narrative? So we know the narrator is deciding that this is the most important, well, at least the most important starting point. And it also tells us that this story is fixated around the father and what he does. And there's an alliterative emphasis on this as well. My father was a fox farmer. So what's interesting about the term farmer that's used here is that it's not really the term that most, I think, would describe what his profession is. In fact, she clarifies immediately after and says, well, that is, he raised silver foxes prior to killing them. So we do have the idea of farmer and growth as something that the narrator is fixated around. So we see that this is her perception, and this might be opposed to the actual reality. In addition to that, we are going to also consider this idea of time and seasons, beginnings and endings, spring and winter. When the winter comes, this is when the harvest of fox pelts will also come. Now, time is also something that's coming up frequently in the piece, and in fact, we do get reference to the calendars that come later on, in addition to this mention of the fall and early winter. This following quote, "The fox, which looked surprisingly small, mean a rat-like, deprived of his arrogant weight of fur. The naked, slippery bodies were collected in a sack and buried at the dump." So the foxes become small, unappealing, and insignificant once they are killed. Their appearance and identity is taken away. And just remember, so this is the outside of the animal. This is what the world sees, and also, as we see some descriptions later on, this is beautiful. This identity is beautiful and malevolent and does not want to be caged in. Once that's taken away, what's left is insignificant and something that's thrown into the dump. And that also tells us a little bit of the significance of these foxes after their identity and skin is taken away. There is no importance. They are garbage. Alive, the foxes inhabited a world my father made for them. It was surrounded by a high guard fence, like a medieval town, with a gate that was padlocked at night. Along the streets of this town were ranged large, sturdy pens. Now, this again is an interesting quote because it shows us that this is an artificial environment. So the father creates a world which he is entirely in charge of. He decides when the gate is opened, and in fact, he's the only one that can open that gate. It's a gate that only a man can pass through. Another quote from the piece. So we do know that the father controls the world. Now let's take a look at the family and see what it tells us about society. So the father is in charge of the environment. So if you think of the word patriarchy, its root word is patra, which means father, where it reflects a society where men are at the top. In this case, the father is in charge of the home, but also there is a patriarchy within society as well, where men are in control of a lot of the environment, particularly the men of households. So he or she is quite vulnerable to the demands of her father, the expectations of her father, no matter how ranged the pens might be. What's interesting also about this environment is that there's high guard fences. It's like a medieval town. You stay within those walls. It's not just the threat from outside. It's also the ability to define what's going to happen on the inside. So, going forward, we're going to take a look at a little bit of a longer quote. "Namely, I did not make pets out of them or anything like it. Nobody but my father ever went into the pens, and he had twice had blood poisoning from bites. When I was bringing them their water, they prowled up and down the paths they had made inside their pens, barking seldom. They saved that for the night time, when they might get up a course of community frenzy, but always watching me, their eyes burning clear gold in their pointed, malevolent faces. They are beautiful for their delicate legs and heavy aristocratic tails, and the bright fur sprinkled on dark down their backs, which gave them their name, but especially for their faces, drawn exquisitely sharp in pure hostility, and their golden eyes. So this quote is really an interesting contrast to what we've seen earlier in the piece, where we're describing these animals as rat-like, um, small and mean, but of course this is after their skin. When they still have their identities, these are fiercely beautiful creatures. There's two quotes in particular from that larger chunk that we're going to look at. Did not make pets out of them, and for their faces drawn exquisitely sharp in pure hostility. These animals are not meant to be domesticated. These are animals that did not enjoy being trapped inside their world. And again, we can begin to reflect on these foxes as reflections of the daughter and potentially young women in that society. So these women did not want to be domesticated and controlled by their partners or those around them. It is against the human condition to be owned and controlled. The human condition is what it means to be a person, right? So to be jealous, to be passionate, these are aspects of the human condition. To be mortal, these are all aspects of what it means to be an individual. One of these aspects that Monroe suggests is part of the human condition is that of individuality or want for individuality. Also interestingly, like the narrator, the foxes sing at night. This mirrors her experiences as well. And again, just another nice word to pull from this quote is aristocratic. So these animals are originally aristocratic prior to losing their identity and their dignity. I have forgotten to say what the foxes were fed. My father's bloody apron reminded me. They were fed horse meat. Again, we have this very clear contrast, and we have the father providing for these animals, providing a home, providing an environment, and the same is said for his daughter. But at the same time, he will ultimately skin them. While he skins the foxes and the horses as well, he also eventually takes away the identity of his daughter, or is certainly instrumental in it. What was more, my father had paid for her. We needed the meat to feed the foxes. We needed the foxes to make our living. All I had done was make more work for my father, who worked hard enough already. So the father owned Flora and has the right to decide her future. So the daughter sees that this is natural. And remember, we are speaking about a narrator. In this case, we might even call this narrator unreliable, or at least speaking from their perspective. She believes it's justified that the father does this with the horse. And to some extent, she might even believe that it is within his rights to do this to her as well, to treat her as only a girl, as just a girl. The piece recognizes, and the speaker recognizes, the narrator recognizes that death is inevitable and necessary to allow the family to live. It is something that the family unit thrives on. And again, what does this say about the society? What is Monroe suggesting about society? It's necessary. Is it necessary to piece people apart to their most two-dimensional forms? Additionally, her freedom is onerous. Making those choices, choosing to free Flora, these are burdensome for her father. They're something that's not celebrated by society, and it's something which is criticized, in fact, and potentially has the power to turn those that they love against them. Again, so these are just a few of the quotes that we can look at. These are just around the fox. By mapping these quotes around, by mapping these quotes as well, we can really grasp what this piece is as a whole. And remember, the fox is in many ways it's a representation of the narrator. So by seeing how that symbol changes, it also reflects how the narrator's trajectory changes as well. And through that change, we have an idea of the conflict that Monroe is trying to get a hold of. Thank you so much for your time. We'll be looking at another symbol from Boys and Girls shortly.